Rob Pardo led Project Titan. His post-mortem presentation on it brought him to tears, but it did not make him any allies, and just 2 years later, Mike Morhaime, president of Blizzard, told Rob that it was time to pack up and go. Last time on the channel, we covered Blizzard's game graveyard, its Netflix show graveyard, and its general downfall, all based on new information from Jason Schreier's upcoming book, Play Nice: The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard and Associated Media Tour. Today, we examine the inside picture of Blizzard from, yes, Mike Morhaime and Bobby Kotick's struggles to managerial chaos on Project, even hour-long shouting matches between Chris Metzen and Rob Pardo, and the company-wide pressure, cope, and tension that all of this caused. It's a story very much framed in Jason's book as starting with Silicon and Synapse, the company's name before it was called Blizzard. Jason describes this early incarnation, but still one led by Mike Morhaime and Frank Pierce, as a caffeine and testosterone-fueled environment. The all-man team would argue, scream, and even, in design meetings, there could be the odd fistfight. And from there, from that seed, Blizzard grew. And from 1994, when it became Blizzard, fueled of course by the success of Warcraft, the following RTS games, and then obviously World of Warcraft a decade later, they found a level of money, pressure, and success that they were not equipped to deal with and did not manage well. So we're going to examine this in 4 levels. Bobby Kotick, Mike Morhaime, the very top level. Then Rob Pardo and the fall of Project Titan. A little bit on Rob Pardo and Chris Metzen's years-long conflict and how this created a very strange rank-and-file culture at Blizzard Entertainment. Now, me and the team are pushing really damn hard. We're trying up our game here, and that is helped by today's sponsor. Where I just learned that Julian Assange is free. Now, he's a divisive guy, hero to some, the opposite to others, and that's why Ground is so incredibly useful. I actually use the Ground News Vantage plan. You can get 40% off it at ground.news/Bellular. Now, let's use them to take a deeper look at this story. Here I can see a top-level view of how it's being covered. 113 sources so far, mostly leaning left and center, with fewer on the right, which means if you're only reading right-leaning sources, you could miss out on the story. And those ratings are from 3 independent news monitoring organizations, and I can also see the likes of Organization Ownership and Factuality. Now, where Ground gets super powerful is headline comparison, because you can just see spin. So the right-leaning Evening Standard says, Julian Assange speaks in public for the first time since release from jail. And that's quite the contrast to HuffPost's headline. WikiLeaks' Julian Assange says he pleaded guilty to journalism in order to be freed. Different styles of headline, right? And that means that while other people are stuck reacting, we can just use Ground, sit back, and take in the big picture. Now, if there's specific topics you want to follow, like say gaming, you can just go to the interest page, and going to the gaming one, see all the latest news, including everything on Epic Games' latest in their fight against the app stores. And look, personal level, I enjoy current affairs, but it's not fun when it's done through algorithms and Twitter reactions and stuff like that. No, Ground is amazing because it consolidates it all into one place where I can see the world in context. It would take countless hours to do the research and all the comparison that I just get from Ground by default. And of course, you can join me over at Ground at ground.news/Bellular, where you'll get 40% off the Vantage plan. One executive told Jason that by the time Mike Morhaime quit in 2018, he looked like a second-term president. Sources close to Mike also agree that he was simply just tired of fighting Bobby. And in fact, 2018 was not Mike Morhaime's first attempt to escape. The first one was in 2017, and it was narrowly avoided by the direct intervention of Kotick and other executives at Blizzard. They tried to keep Mike, they only succeeded to keep him for 1 more year. Now, this is not to say that it was a constant state of war. Rather, the picture that's painted is one of a slowly encroaching pressure. Kotick remolding Blizzard to fit his idea of how the company should be ran. And not always through direct intervention and micromanagement. Rather, it was the appointment of staff and the creation of an environment with those staff. And it's an environment that Morhaime wasn't fully against, because what it was is a little bit more financial accountability. After all, it was Mike Morhaime that pushed for in-game monetization, the likes of the Celestial Steed and the Real Money Auction House, well before Bobby's influence surged post the failure of Project Titan. And so the idea of financial responsibility, adult supervision, is not necessarily bad. The problem is how they went about it. Where we learn a little more is Jason recounting the words of Geo Hunt, who was Mike Morhaime's chief of staff for 2 years. This is a quote from him. He was a profit-motivated guy like everyone else. The difference is, he wasn't a profit-motivated first guy. So what Morhaime essentially wanted was profit from success from quality. That's what he felt the rest of Activision did not necessarily understand. Fans of the Call of Duty franchise will no doubt agree, and I think what perfectly encapsulates this is that financial responsibility layer established in 2016 by, of course, Armin, their new CFO, a man who didn't understand the value of BlizzCon, because of course, he wouldn't. He came from the soap industry. Cultural value, that's not the sort of thing that he'll understand. And so, yes, everybody involved wanted profit. Everybody involved wanted to spend money wisely, but the how matters. The relationship with the players, cultivating that, maintaining a high standard, that's what Mike wanted. And ultimately, in his resignation letter to Bobby, he basically said he no longer felt that he could continue to achieve that with people at Blizzard. Now, we've seen the impact here, but it is Blizzard's very own failure with Project Titan that kicked off the worst of it. And the failures of Project Titan happened because internally, Blizzard was just a mess. Titan is a game that fails on many different levels, and here's essentially how the story goes. World of Warcraft is an absolutely absurd success, but they do not trust that it will last, and they think if anyone's going to kill World of Warcraft, it should be us. Rob Pardo would lead this project, and he started by gathering the best of Blizzard Entertainment. Slowly but surely, WoW's most notable names, and I'm sure many experienced staff that never really got public fame or limelight, they were moved over to Project Titan. Their goal was to build a game for everyone, one with a radically larger target audience than World of Warcraft. And to quote art director Justin Thevariot, this meant gamers, non-gamers, young, old, men, women, everything in between. Basically, something for everybody. And when you look at that Overwatch cinematic, what comes to mind, of course, is the work of Pixar. I think what they wanted was something in the vein of Toy Story, that at least for the American culture that they could understand, would speak to just about everybody in the way that Toy Story was able to do so successfully. Per Jason, the hook was that it was essentially two games in one, with players taking control of superhero-like characters who lived normal lives during the day and secretly battled against evil forces at night. An early presentation showed the player as a professional chef, popping a dish into the oven before going off on a mission. When they returned, the dish was perfectly cooked and ready to serve, which certainly does raise questions about the cooking technology of Earth 2070. Anyhow, the team built countless prototypes, and the thing is, the prototypes were fun. They had fun combat, they had dungeons, they had elements from The Sims, from Animal Crossing, but the problem was, they never had a core loop. But with World of Warcraft bankrolling this, little pressure to ship, and an absurd, almost impossible to achieve goal of defeating World of Warcraft, the project went nowhere fast. One artist in the project says that they made 5 games worth of art. They in fact had an art asset management pipeline that was such a mess that people would draw a character, only to later discover that somebody already drew the same character to the same spec 2 years previous. Like so many game projects, they built proprietary technology that only slowed them down, and all the while the competition grew. World of Warcraft was no longer the only mega game in the block. Riot Games existed, League of Legends came out, they had money, and with that money, they poached almost the entire animation team on Project Titan. With the money Riot offered and the work experience these people had, it is no wonder that that happened. One artist likened working on the project to Groundhog Day. So what we see here is all typical of a project with weak direction. This is where director Rob Pardo comes in. But he wasn't just director of this game, no, he was the vice president of game design at Blizzard Entertainment, responsible for the direction of all games. Teams could not fully get his attention, and when they did get his attention, it wasn't his best. Quoting the book, designers would spend weeks getting excited about an idea. They'd set up a meeting with Pardo to review it, only for him to shoot down the idea without offering an explanation or alternative direction. The book continues saying that in previous games, not everybody always agreed with Pardo's decisions, but at least he made decisions. Obviously, that meant that projects could move forward. So essentially, for years, Pardo was not able to commit, and under this mismanagement, Titan died. Some staff were actually laid off because Blizzard could not find a role for them outside of the Titan team. After this point, a core team, including Chris Metzen and Jeff Kaplan, would lead a small core team to salvage it, of course, into the project that became known as Overwatch. Around this time, during a tearful post-mortem, Pardo said that he should have done more about the game's technical and artistic problems. That's directly from Jason. But the thing is, the staff working under him knew about all of those problems. They are the very people who drew a character only to realize that somebody else drew it 2 years earlier. The framing of the problem felt like, if only Pardo could have got it right, it would have worked, which to them had stung, because they tried, but the problem is he couldn't commit, and that bottlenecked their success. Jason then details, I think, what makes this more interesting. After this, several executives, that's Blizzard executives and directors as in game directors of other Blizzard Entertainment projects, and of course we can publicly deduce who they are, they demanded that Pardo be removed from leadership. They quite simply said they did not want to be his direct report anymore. And in 2014, Mike Morhaime told Rob Pardo that it was in fact time to go. 2 years later, in 2016, two things relevant to that particular thread of the story happen. Number one, Overwatch releases. Bonfire Studios, a new company from Rob Pardo, also would be unveiled. It's still going. It's now 2024. It's been 8 years and nothing has came out of that company. There have been rumblings of things that haven't sounded amazing in terms of getting stuff off the ground, but other than that, we just don't know. This all then gives us insight into the managerial problems that existed at Blizzard Entertainment. The idea that Rob Pardo would have so much responsibility on one game while also having a heavily defined responsibility on every other game means that they had core creatives massively overtasked, way beyond capacity, in a way that bottlenecked Blizzard. This is the sort of thing that can manifest real bad. Chris Metzen's involvement in the attempt to salvage Project Titan is of course not a surprise. He worked on it since the very beginning. But what none of us knew is a long-standing conflict existed between him and Rob Pardo. Now, Rob Pardo was the lead of game design at Blizzard. Chris Metzen was basically the chief creative. The stories, the worlds, they all came through him. These are two people who are pillars of Blizzard, and of course with Chris Metzen and Thrall, I mean, Metzen's also extremely well known to people. Staff working below them then didn't know who to listen to. Schreier frames this as quite the Lennon-McCartney situation where Project Titan somehow actually resembled one of their better working periods. Of course, they were all wearing many hats at this point in time, but it is in the development of StarCraft 2 and Diablo 2 that things were particularly bad. I'm going to read a quote from game developers' write-up after they spoke to Jason. Anecdotes include a drunken brawl that led to a door being torn down, Ultima Online sessions that slowed down work in Diablo 2, and meetings that devolved into shouting matches. One developer in StarCraft 2 told Schreier that developers would just, quote, sit there for a full hour and watch Metzen and Pardo argue. Metzen would say it should be pink. Pardo would instantly say it should be blue, and that only an idiot would make it pink, they said. Ending with a quote, "It was painful to watch." It absolutely would be. Those are the people who control your future, and there they are, arguing over details, and seemingly the picture painted is that nobody else in the room was able to say, hey guys, wind your neck in, that's stupid, why are you arguing? A giant problem, but one that is not a surprise and that does fit the rockstar developer characterization of a few of these people, where success has just got a way of blinding people to their weaknesses. Maybe self-justifications, rationalizations that, yeah, we did get into a drunken brawl. Yeah, in the early 90s there was a fist fight, but those were manifestations of our raw passion, and it's that raw passion that made the game so good. But the problem with the games industry is, as time passed, games grew harder. They took longer, scope increased, and a lot of people rapidly found out that they could no longer succeed in spite of their weaknesses. What's interesting now is the modern return of Chris Metzen to Blizzard. He essentially left the company after Overwatch, saying that he was completely burnt out. Given what you've heard, him and Pardo having that sort of relationship, working on all of these games, all of that time that went into Titan, I can totally see why Metzen was burnt out. Returning though, he commented that one of the biggest differences that he saw was how creativity worked, and how at the company, things were now far less bottlenecked, far less just concentrated in only the key, most senior people in the project. Now, that is actually something that I would say damaged them. It gave them some benefits in Dragonflight, but it also damaged them. What's been interesting is Metzen being able to give creative direction, but not micromanaging all the details. And at least thus far on the project he's working on, it does seem to be paying off well. Back to the post-Titan period though. Organization-wide, standards would slip. Abnormal things would become normal. Blizzard would just pride itself though, saying, well, this is our rambunctious culture. The book says that this is a place where they were proud that you could come to work in a t-shirt and flip-flops instead of a suit. And that does sound good. You don't need to wear a suit. But at what point do problems just become a bit of an excuse? How far do you have to get to the point where things that are objectively damaging, like those shouting matches, are just rationalized as part of the process? Or, I suppose to be a bit more modern, at what point is it all just cope, as things are brushed under the rug? And of course, in yesterday's video, we saw this exact thing applied to Odyssey, the survival game. They just had this perception, this belief of, quote, we're Blizzard, we make epic, massive, multi-million selling games, and that was used as a justification not to ship games. Where Blizzard quality became an excuse not to just make a well-scoped game at a high level of quality, but rather to piss 7 years into Project Titan with no clear plan. And so you can see how the desire to make epic games and high-quality games can be a really good thing, but if you're fearful, they can so quickly turn into cope and rationalization, where essentially abdication of professional duty happens, and from the top, things just unravel. And for the rest of Blizzard, unfortunately, staff would take this to heart. There's a minor note inside the game developer excerpt about Andy Weir, author of The Martian. He allegedly faced retaliation from his peers after protesting work hours. It essentially became a weird, toxic, self-policing group. The sort of thing where you get people who succeed in spite of their flaws, and then sort of lord it over everybody else. Instead of working inefficiently, having to pull all-nighters and ruining their health to get some job done, and realizing that's actually really inefficient and bad for their long-term career, they say, oh no, that's just a mark of how dedicated I am, how I've bled for this game. You get people who are like that, and as much as I'm sure they suffer through some pain, the problem is they still let everybody else down, and there's no excuse for that. An incredible detail emerges through the reporting where mass unionization efforts in 2021 did not need a firm clampdown from Blizzard management. That's because Blizzard staff policed themselves. I'm going to go to another quote. Blizzard employees coped with the long hours by bonding over alcohol and turning the office into a second home. Building life around the office meant workers began dating their colleagues, and an incestuous culture of office romances took hold. And of course, yes, statistically lots of people do end up meeting a significant other at the office, but everybody knows that that can go very wrong, and a company has got to be extremely responsible and extremely careful. The thing is, Blizzard were not that. Their eyes were off the ball, and that of course led to an environment where a lot of bad things happened, as of course the lawsuits exposed. And that's the thing. Life becomes work, and then it all happens at the campus. Work is supposed to be at the campus, but now life is at the campus. You are the campus, you are the company. And so it's no surprise that their culture devolved. And of course, one made worse by pay. See, in a context like this, there's a consequence of paying too little that Blizzard didn't perhaps think about. If you do that, you will retain some people. They will be low self-worth, low ambition people. Your high performers will take the objectively superior offers given to them by Riot, and they will just go over there instead. Again, I'll quote from the reporting. You'll see in the book that pay disparity and arguments over bonuses were themes from the very early days, and helped lead to all sorts of departures over the years, including most notably the creation of ArenaNet in 2000 and Carbine in 2005. That's of course the studios behind Guild Wars and WildStar. The basic setup was one of low wages and profit share, but how that profit share happened was mediated by disagreements between people at the top. Mike Morhaime felt that the profit share should be equal across the company. Essentially, it should be more egalitarian. In a year where Warcraft pops up, that's great, everybody wins. The Diablo developers who haven't shipped their game yet still get to enjoy a bonus. And maybe if World of Warcraft doesn't have a big expansion to bring in the revenue, the Diablo team can have a release and the Warcraft people will get money. Teams will cover each other's backs. That's a bit of how Morhaime felt. Bobby Kotick, of course, disagreed. To him, profit share is best distributed to those who earned the most, which of course, if you're a game director or a bit higher up, is good. But either way, there are flaws in a system like this. Referring to the Warcraft team, who were obviously financially propping up the situation, this led to some staff, quote, at certain points, acting like they were in an ivory tower. Add to that, of course, all that we learned through the California lawsuit, and you can see how the cult-like aspects of modern corporate campus culture took on a Blizzard flavor. We all know what it's like whenever a campus becomes a little bit of a cult. It's the sort of thing that a television show like Silicon Valley will parody, only for people who work in the Valley to think, damn, those writers really did get pretty close to how The Office can feel. That too happened at Blizzard, and those stories of people essentially just relocating their life to the office, those are true. You see, that low pay, that often meant that unless you're a project director, you're gonna have a commute. Either a commute or a hell of a lot of roommates. And that would mean that people would just not really go home early. They would just stay in the office, live in the office, and with that things would fester. And rapidly, if you were the sort of person who came in, did your work, you're dialed in, it's time to go home, you go home, and you have your life. You'll then come into work the next day, but compared to other people at the company, people who maybe were inefficient, who blew past their deadlines, who pulled overtime, who spent a ludicrous amount of their life at the office, well, you'd be a bit of an outsider. That is the sort of thing that is reported, and the idea of cliques forming within teams is, one that I have heard many personal anecdotes on, all, of course, to the negative. For all of Blizzard's problems, though, the people there did love the games, and they did love the company. Jason even talks a little bit about speaking to some women there who, yes, had in many ways a awful and, notably unfair experience. On the other hand, many of them also reported parts of the company culture that they did love. And that essentially is the story of this company. It's one of high highs, of low lows, and one that is not simple, one that is multifactorial, because fundamentally, you take a bunch of people who, back in 1991, are essentially getting into the odd drunken brawl and shouting match across the table trying to design a game, you then flush them full of cash, turn them into rock stars, but they're a bunch of creatives. They haven't got management experience, and it's a young industry. They're not going to have a mentor. So how do you think that's going to go? What's particularly telling to me, though, is the internal reaction to Mike Morhaime's resignation as reported in Bloomberg's excerpt. Blizzard staff was devastated. They worshipped Morhaime. He was the boss who greeted receptionists by name and responded directly to emails from low-level workers. Hundreds of employees wrote emails and letters to Morhaime to thank him and wish him farewell. They soon discovered what Morhaime already knew. Blizzard would never be the same. We will, of course, know more with the book's full release on the 8th. Till then, you can check out our previous report, which is going into the downfall of Blizzard's games, but for something new, something a bit different, EA's AI slop. It's grimly funny, and it shows us how these companies talk when investors are in the room. I think you'll love it. Click on the box that's about to replace my face.